She had never imagined that a simple message on a Wednesday afternoon would make her heart race the way it did. It came from the coordinator of a small community event, someone she barely knew. The note was short and casual, the kind people send when they're hurried and juggling too many things. It said there was an open performance slot at the weekend gathering, and since they'd heard she played piano, they wondered if she would like to fill it. They weren't expecting anything big, just something light, something simple. She read the message twice, then a third time. Her fingers hovered over the screen, as if the words might slip away if she didn't hold them still. She wasn't used to being asked to perform. Most of her music lived inside her small apartment, tucked between evenings when she came home exhausted from work and found comfort in playing a few notes. Her keyboard stood near the window, always waiting, always patient. She didn't consider herself a real musician. She had learned the basics as a child and then slowly taught herself more over the years. She wasn't one of those people who filled big halls or posted impressive videos online. She simply played because it gave her a sense of peace she couldn't find anywhere else. The piano was like a quiet friend who understood her when she struggled to explain herself to the world. So the idea that someone wanted her to perform was strange and wonderful at the same time. She tried to push down the sudden, nervous excitement building in her chest. The community event wasn't anything grand. It was held in a modest hall not far from her neighborhood, where families came to support local talent and enjoy a relaxed weekend evening. She knew it wasn't a place where people expected something breathtaking, just something pleasant. Still, to her, the invitation felt special. It felt like a small door opening, a chance to share something she usually kept hidden. She finally typed a response, her hands trembling a little. She agreed to perform, trying to sound calm even though her heart was beating a bit too fast. The coordinator replied quickly, thanking her and adding one more line. Just keep it simple. Nothing too heavy. The message made her smile, though she wasn't sure why. She understood why they said it. Most of the audience would be there for fun, not for intense or emotional performances. People came to relax, have snacks, chat with their neighbors, and enjoy light entertainment. She knew the expectations, and she couldn't blame anyone for wanting a peaceful atmosphere. But as she set her phone aside, she felt a little tug inside her chest. It was the same feeling she always had when she played the piece she kept for herself, the one she never showed anyone, not even close friends. It was a piece she had been shaping quietly for years, adding tiny parts whenever she felt bold or overwhelmed, smoothing it out every time life gave her a reason to sit at the piano for longer than usual. It wasn't a difficult piece in the technical sense, but it held emotions she didn't usually share. It carried memories, hopes, disappointments, small victories, and quiet moments she wished she could put into words but never managed to. Every time she played it, it felt like telling the truth without needing to speak. But she wasn't sure if she should play it at the event. It didn't fit the idea of keeping it simple. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it wasn't light either. She worried it might be too personal for a cheerful community gathering. That evening, she sat at her keyboard like she always did after work. Her fingers touched the keys gently, almost protectively. She played a soft, basic tune, the kind they probably expected at the event. Sounded nice enough, safe and comfortable. Something that would easily blend into the background while people applauded politely. Then, without thinking, her hands drifted into the first line of her own piece. The difference was immediate. Her breathing changed, her shoulders relaxed, her eyes closed without her telling them to. She moved through the melody slowly, letting each note settle before moving to the next. Felt right. Felt honest. It felt like something she wanted people to hear, not because she wanted to impress them, but because she wanted them to feel something real. When the last note faded, she opened her eyes and sighed. She wasn't sure which direction to take. She wanted to follow the request and keep things simple. She didn't want to ruin the mood of the event or seem like she was showing off. That wasn't her nature at all. She didn't crave attention. She just wanted to play. But she also couldn't shake the idea that maybe this small performance meant more than she first thought. Maybe it was a quiet chance to finally share the music she had hidden for so long. The next day at work, the invitation still lingered in her mind. She caught herself humming the melody under her breath while organizing files and responding to emails. A coworker noticed and smiled, asking if she was excited for the event. She nodded without going into details, keeping her internal debate private. When the break arrived, she walked outside for some fresh air. A soft breeze moved through the courtyard, and she sat on a bench, closing her eyes for a moment. She thought about the audience. Strangers, mostly. People she had never met and would never meet again. Maybe performing something personal wasn't a bad thing. Maybe sharing her piece would simply be another form of connection. A human moment passed between her and a room full of people who didn't need to know her story to feel the emotion behind it. But then the practical side of her pushed back. What if they didn't understand it? What if they found it too serious or too unexpected for the relaxed setting? She didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. She didn't want to be remembered as the person who made the room fall silent in the wrong way. She returned home that evening still unsure. Again, she sat at the piano. Again, she played both pieces, the simple one and the emotional one. But instead of making her choice clearer, it made the situation feel even heavier. Both melodies held different parts of her. One showed her careful, quiet nature, the side of her that didn't want to cause trouble or stand out too much. The other revealed the part of her that longed to express herself fully, even if it meant being vulnerable. Before going to bed, she stood by the window, looking at the streetlights outside. She whispered to herself that she would decide soon. She had no more than 2 days left before the event. That night, sleep came slowly. She lay awake, thinking about all the times she wished she had been braver in life. All the moments she stayed quiet when she wanted to speak. All the times she stepped back when her heart told her to move forward. Maybe this wasn't about a song. Maybe it was about making a small promise to herself. But as morning arrived, she still had no answer. She went through her day normally, but a restlessness grew beneath the surface. Every free minute she had, she found herself tapping her fingers on her desk as if searching for the rhythm of her future decision. When she finally returned home that night, she didn't turn on the lights right away. She walked straight to the piano, letting the room stay dim and peaceful. She sat down, took a deep breath, and placed her hands on the keys. She closed her eyes and allowed her fingers to choose for her. They chose the emotional piece. It wasn't a loud choice, but a gentle, steady one. It was made not out of a desire to impress, but out of a quiet need to be true to herself. When she finished playing, she sat still for a long moment. She didn't smile, but she felt something inside her settle, a calm acceptance. She knew what she would do at the event. She knew she was taking a risk, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to take it. Whether the audience liked it or not, she would play the piece that meant the most to her. And she hoped, quietly and sincerely, that someone in the room might feel even a small part of what she felt when she played it. She woke up the next morning with a mix of excitement and worry pressing against her chest. Even though she had finally decided what she wanted to play, that didn't stop the doubts from creeping in as soon as her eyes opened. The light coming through the curtains was soft, the kind that usually slowed her thoughts and made the morning peaceful. But today, it felt like her mind was running ahead of her before she even sat up. She moved through her routine slowly, almost cautiously. Making breakfast felt strange, like her hands were going through the motions while her thoughts stayed fixed on the performance. She tried to distract herself, turning on a calm radio station while she ate. But even the soft music made her think about the coming evening. She wondered what the crowd would look like. Would people pay attention? Would they even care? Would her piece feel out of place in the warm and casual atmosphere? She shook the thoughts away and reminded herself that she wasn't doing this to impress anyone. She was doing it because it felt right. Still, knowing that and fully believing it were two different things. All day at work, she felt like she was moving through water. Her tasks were simple, but her mind kept drifting, replaying the melody over and over. A coworker stopped by her desk, noticed her absent look, and asked if she was all right. She nodded with a small smile, saying she was just tired. She didn't feel ready to talk about the performance. Not because she was hiding it, but because putting it into words made it feel bigger, and right now she was trying to keep herself calm. During lunch, she walked outside again. She sat in the same courtyard as the day before, watching a group of children chase each other near the trees. Their laughter floated through the air, light and careless. She found herself wishing she could hold onto that kind of ease for just one day. She didn't want fear to swallow her excitement. She opened a small notebook she carried everywhere and wrote down little thoughts about why the performance mattered to her. She didn't write anything dramatic, just simple lines like, "I want to share something honest," and "I want to stop hiding what I love." Seeing the words written out helped her breathe a little easier. It reminded her that this wasn't about perfection. It was about expression. When she got home that evening, she set her bag down softly and walked straight to her keyboard. She played her piece once, slowly, letting the notes settle in the room like gentle footsteps. She didn't try to make it perfect. She simply wanted to feel the emotion behind it. When she reached the final note, she let her hands rest on the keys for a moment, grounding herself. She spent the rest of the evening preparing small things for the next day, choosing what to wear, trying to get to bed early, drinking warm tea to calm her nerves. She reminded herself that this wasn't a competition. No one was grading her. The people at the event were there for enjoyment, not judgment. Despite that, sleep didn't come easily. She turned from side to side, her thoughts painting different versions of how the performance might go. Some were comforting, others made her stomach tighten. At one point, she sat up and looked around her quiet room. The darkness was soft, and the only sound was a distant car passing on the street. She breathed deeply and repeated a few simple words to herself. "I can do this." Eventually, she drifted into sleep, though lightly, as if her mind was still half awake. The morning of the event arrived faster than she expected. She opened her eyes, feeling both restless and strangely calm. It was no longer a question of whether she was ready. It was happening, and she had to trust herself. She moved through her morning quietly. She made a simple breakfast, took a warm shower, and chose a comfortable outfit that made her feel like herself. She didn't try to dress in a way that looked impressive. She wanted to feel natural, grounded, steady. As the afternoon approached, she packed her small bag with the things she needed. Her sheet music, a bottle of water, and a notebook just in case she wanted to write down her feelings afterward. She stood in front of the mirror once, taking a long breath, studying the reflection of someone who had made a difficult choice and was about to own it. When she stepped outside, the air felt fresh. The sky was clear, and a soft breeze carried the scent of distant flowers. She walked slowly, allowing herself time to settle into the moment. She didn't want to rush. She wanted to feel present, even if her heart was beating faster than usual. The community hall was only a 15-minute walk from her home. She had passed it many times before, during evening strolls on her way to the market or just simple walks when she needed air. But today the building looked different. It wasn't really the building that had changed. It was her. She was walking towards something she had never done before. As she approached the entrance, she could hear faint sounds from inside. People chatting, volunteers arranging chairs, someone testing a microphone. The warmth of the community space spilled outward, reaching her before she even stepped inside. She paused at the door for a moment, pressing her hand against her chest to steady herself. Then, with a quiet breath, she walked in. The hall was brighter than she expected. Rows of chairs filled the center, and small decorations hung along the walls, giving the place a cheerful atmosphere. Families were taking their seats, children running around, elders settling comfortably. The smell of snacks from the refreshment table drifted through the air. A volunteer walked up to her with a welcoming smile and pointed her toward the backstage area. She thanked them softly and made her way behind the curtain. The backstage wasn't separated by walls, just a simple partition that offered enough privacy for the performers. When the coordinator saw her arrive, they gave her a friendly nod and asked if she felt ready. She returned a small smile and said yes. The coordinator mentioned again that this was a relaxed event, nothing to worry about, and reminded her gently to keep things light. She nodded politely, not mentioning the piece she had chosen. She knew they meant well. Their words came from practicality, not pressure. She found a small corner where she could sit with her sheet music on her lap. She didn't need the pages to play her piece. She knew it by heart, but holding the sheets helped her focus. She listened as other performers went on stage one by one. A young boy played a short guitar tune, drawing claps and cheers. A small group sang softly together, their voices blending in a sweet, untrained harmony. Everything felt friendly and warm, but with each performance her nerves grew sharper. She tried to steady her breathing, reminding herself that she belonged here too. She had been invited just like everyone else. When the coordinator finally walked toward her and whispered, "You're next," her body tensed for a moment. She stood slowly, brushing her hands against her clothes to keep them steady. As she waited just a few feet from the stage, she heard the audience applauding the previous act. Her heart pounded, but there was also a quiet strength inside her. Something steady that she hadn't felt before. It was as if all the moments she practiced alone, all the evenings she played to calm her own soul, had led her to this single point. The coordinator stepped to the microphone and introduced her simply, mentioning that she would be performing a piano piece. The audience clapped politely. She stepped forward. The stage lights weren't too bright, and the piano looked familiar enough to comfort her. She walked slowly toward it, feeling each step as if she were walking into a new chapter of herself. The audience faded into a blur of faces, warm but distant. She sat down on the bench, placed her fingers on the keys, and felt the cool smoothness beneath her fingertips. She took one breath, then another. She played the first note, and the world around her began to quiet. What she didn't know was that the moment she touched the keys, everything in the room would start to shift, even if she couldn't see it yet. When her fingers touched the keys, she felt a small tremor run through her hands. Not from fear alone, but from the weight of the decision she had made. For a moment, she could hear everything. The soft coughs in the audience, the shifting of someone trying to adjust their seat, the rustle of a program being folded in half. The sounds filled her ears as if the room were waiting to test her resolve. She closed her eyes for one slow breath, not to block out the world, but to find a steady center inside herself. She had felt this moment coming all day, rising like a tide she couldn't stop. But now that she was here, she realized the moment wasn't as frightening as she imagined. It was delicate, yes, but not impossible. It was like standing on a quiet bridge between who she had always been and who she hoped she could become. She opened her eyes, let her fingers rest on the keys, and began with the simple notes she had practiced, the ones she knew they expected her to play. The melody was light, calm, easy. Her hands moved gently, and the audience relaxed into soft attention. A few people smiled. A child leaned against a parent's shoulder, already soothed by the familiar rhythm. But even as she played those first gentle bars, a feeling kept rising in her chest. It nudged her like a whisper she couldn't ignore. She had promised herself she would stay true to what mattered to her. She had chosen this night to stop hiding the part of her she had always kept tucked away. Her breath caught slightly as she reached the point in the simple tune where she could switch, where the melody could grow into something deeper, something she had poured herself into. She hesitated for just 1 second. Then she shifted her hands. The change was subtle at first, almost like a natural variation. But as the notes unfolded, the room sensed it. The light melody deepened. Her touch grew more intentional, her movements more expressive. She leaned slightly closer to the piano, her shoulders loosening as she moved into the music that belonged to her alone. The audience quieted, sensing a shift even if they couldn't name it. The casual chatter that had lingered at the back of the room faded. Conversations fell away. The atmosphere changed without her even realizing it. She didn't look at anyone. She couldn't. If she saw a confused face or a bored glance, it would break her focus. Instead, she kept her eyes on the keys, letting the warm glow of the stage lights guide her. The more she played, the more she forgot she was performing at all. The room dissolved, and she slipped into the quiet world she had always kept hidden inside her own home. Her fingers glided with a gentleness she didn't have to think about. Every note felt like it was coming from somewhere deeper than memory. She wasn't performing. She was confessing something. Something she had carried for years without ever saying out loud. The melody swelled softly, carrying the weight of quiet days when she played to soothe her worries. It carried the nights she spent sitting alone at her keyboard, letting her emotions spill into the music because she didn't know how to speak them anywhere else. It carried the hopeful mornings when she played just to remind herself she still had dreams tucked inside her heart. As the melody shifted into its most delicate part, her hands slowed. She barely touched the keys, letting the sound bloom like a faint whisper. Someone in the audience inhaled sharply. Someone else leaned forward. The room wasn't silent in a heavy way. It was silent in the way people get when they know they're witnessing something personal, something fragile. She felt her heart rushing but not in panic. It was a kind of emotional rush that made her eyes sting for a moment, though she didn't cry. She breathed through it, letting the music speak where she couldn't. She didn't know how long she played. Time seemed stretched thin, almost disappearing. She only knew her hands kept moving, pulling her deeper into the moment. By the time she reached the middle of the piece, she felt a wave of something she couldn't name. Not fear, not pride, something calmer, something like acceptance. She didn't look up, but she could sense the room leaning closer toward her. It was strange to feel so connected to a group of people she had never met. Strange and comforting at the same time. When the melody began to rise again, she let her hands follow it naturally. The notes grew warmer, fuller, like a soft echo of a feeling she once had and didn't want to forget. She could feel the tension in her shoulders melt away. Piece by piece, she let go of the fear she had carried with her for so many years. She no longer worried about whether the audience liked the piece. She no longer worried about whether she had made the right decision. All she cared about was staying present, letting the music breathe through her. When she entered the final section, her hands slowed again. The melody stepped gently into the quietest part of the piece, the part she always played late at night with the lights dim. She had written that section during a difficult time, when everything in her life felt uncertain. That part of the melody had carried her through long evenings, when she didn't know what tomorrow might look like. Playing it now brought a different feeling. It wasn't sadness. It was gratitude. It was a reminder of how far she had come, even if the world hadn't noticed. Her hands moved with steady softness. Each note landed like a quiet truth. And in that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not loud pride. Not the kind that seeks attention. It was a small, quiet pride, like a light glowing gently inside her chest. Finally, she reached the last line of the piece, the one she always slowed down for, the one that felt like a peaceful goodbye. She held the final note. She let it linger, and then she lifted her hands. For a breath, the room stayed still. She didn't know what to do. She didn't want to look up. She stared at the keys, her chest rising and falling, her fingers still tingling from the emotion of the performance. Had she made a mistake? Had she gone too far? Had she misunderstood the tone of the event? The silence stretched on for what felt like a lifetime, but in reality it was only a second. Then she heard it. The first clap came from somewhere to her right. Not loud, not urgent, just steady. Then another. Then more. She finally looked up. People were rising from their seats. Not all at once. Not in a dramatic rush, but in a gentle wave, as if each person felt moved in their own quiet way. Some were smiling softly. Some looked thoughtful. A few looked surprised, like they hadn't expected to feel as much as they did. A standing ovation. A real one. Not because her piece was perfect. Not because she played with flawless technique. But because she had shared something honest, something real. Her heart trembled as she stood and gave a small bow. She didn't know how to respond to the warmth rising from the crowd. She had never imagined a moment like this. As she walked off stage, her hands still shaking slightly, she felt a strange mix of relief and joy settle inside her. She had taken a risk, a real one. She had stepped beyond her fear and trusted her heart. And now, for the first time in a long time, she felt a quiet kind of courage growing inside her. She didn't know what would come next, but she knew one thing for certain. Tonight had changed something in her, and she would carry that change with her for the rest of her life. She stepped behind the curtain with her heart still shaking, though she tried to hide it by keeping her hands close to her sides. The sound of the applause still echoed faintly in her ears, as if it were following her even after she left the stage. She walked slowly, trying to steady her breathing, trying to understand what had just happened. It all felt unreal, like a moment she had imagined many times but never believed would come to life. The backstage area was quiet except for the soft buzzing of lights and the muffled voices of people in the audience taking their seats again. She leaned against the small table where other performers had placed their belongings. For a moment she didn't move. She just existed in the space, trying to bring herself back to the world. Someone walked up to her, a volunteer who had been handing out programs earlier. Their face was warm, full of surprise and admiration. They told her the performance was beautiful, that it had touched the entire room. She didn't know how to respond. She simply smiled, thanked them softly, and looked down at her hands, still trembling. She took a seat on a folding chair nearby and let her shoulders relax. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about what she should have done differently or whether she had made mistakes. She wasn't comparing herself to anyone. She wasn't hiding behind safe choices. She was simply sitting with the truth of what she had shared. The coordinator approached her next. Their expression held a mixture of surprise, pride, and maybe even a little guilt for telling her earlier to keep things simple. They admitted they hadn't expected something so deep or moving but were glad she trusted her instincts. Hearing that made her chest warm. It was nice to know that even people who didn't understand her choice at first could appreciate what she had done. She nodded, still feeling a bit overwhelmed. She wasn't used to receiving so much attention or heartfelt feedback. Her life had been quiet, steady, ordinary. She spent more evenings alone than with others, not out of sadness but because she found peace in solitude. But tonight felt different. It felt like the world had suddenly opened its arms and allowed her to step inside without asking her to change anything. She stayed backstage as the next performer took the stage, a young girl singing a gentle song. The hall softened again into its warm, familiar atmosphere, but she could still feel a lingering shift in the air, as if her music had left a small mark behind. When she finally stepped out from behind the curtain to watch the last few acts, she noticed something unusual. People looked at her, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but with a kind of recognition. Some smiled softly, others nodded politely. It wasn't the attention that startled her. It was the kindness. She walked quietly to an empty seat near the side of the hall. From there, she watched the remaining performances, letting herself settle back into the role of observer. But even as she tried to blend into the background, the emotions of the night stayed with her. When the final performer finished and the coordinator returned to the stage to thank everyone, she felt a soft ache in her chest, a peaceful one. She hadn't expected to feel this full, this connected, this alive. Music had always been her private shelter, something she used to soothe herself. But tonight, it had become something else. It had become a bridge. After the event ended, people began to gather near the refreshment table, chatting in cheerful clusters. She wasn't the type to push herself into conversations, but she didn't need to. People approached her. A couple thanked her for the performance, saying it reminded them of moments they hadn't thought about in years. Another person said the melody brought them comfort in a way they couldn't explain. One woman, older and gentle in her tone, told her she had never seen the hall go so quiet during a performance. She said it felt as if everyone in the room had paused their worries just to breathe in the sound of the music. The woman held her hand briefly, with the kind of sincerity that reached past words. All of it felt surreal. She kept responding with small smiles, soft words of gratitude, and nods of appreciation. Each compliment warmed her, not because she needed praise, but because it made her feel understood. She stepped outside for a moment to get some fresh air. The night had settled softly over the town. Streetlights flickered faintly, and the cool breeze brushed her face, grounding her back into herself. She closed her eyes and let the night wrap around her like a calm blanket. For a moment, she replayed the performance in her mind. Not the notes, but the feeling of it. She remembered how everything had faded when she shifted into her true peace, how her world had narrowed to the music and her fingers, and the quiet heartbeat inside her chest. She remembered the silence that followed, the breathless pause before the applause began. She remembered the sound of people rising to their feet. She didn't think she would ever forget it. When she walked back inside, a few children were still running around, trying to grab the last cookies from the snack table. A man was folding chairs in the back, humming softly. The hall had returned to its ordinary rhythm, but she noticed that every time someone glanced her way, their expression softened. As she gathered her things, the coordinator approached her again. They offered her another opportunity, an invitation to perform at the next event. She wasn't expecting it. She didn't know how to respond at first, caught between excitement and disbelief. But after a moment of thought, she said she would consider it. Not because she wasn't sure, but because she needed time to understand what tonight meant for her future. She walked home slowly, carrying her bag on her shoulder, the cool night air following her. The streets were quiet, and she could hear her footsteps on the pavement. She liked walking alone, especially after emotional nights like this one. It helped her process things at her own pace. As she reached the corner near her home, she passed a small shop that had large glass windows. The lights inside were off, but she could see her reflection in the glass. She paused for a moment, studying the outline of her figure, the calm expression she hadn't expected to see. The woman in the reflection didn't look like someone who doubted herself. She didn't look like someone who hesitated to take risks. She looked like someone who had stepped into her own light, even if just for a moment. She smiled softly at her reflection before turning away and continuing home. Inside her apartment, she placed her bag on the table and walked toward her keyboard. She didn't turn on the overhead lights, just the small lamp near the window, which cast a gentle glow over the keys. She sat down and pressed a single note, then another. But she didn't play her emotional piece. She played something lighter, something soft and new. She wasn't practicing for anything. She wasn't preparing for a future performance. She was simply playing because the night had filled her heart, and she wanted to let some of that feeling spill back into the world. She played for a long time, her fingers moving without pressure, without fear. When she finally stopped, she rested her hands on her lap and looked out the window at the quiet street below. A small thought rested gently in her mind. Maybe this was only the beginning. Not of fame, not of big stages or bright lights, but the beginning of learning to trust herself. The beginning of letting her inner world breathe. The beginning of stepping into moments that once felt too big for her. She stood up and stretched, feeling a warm sense of peace move through her. Then she walked toward her bed, tired but content. As she lay down, she thought one last time about the applause, the smiles, the quiet moments of connection. And with a calm, steady breath, she drifted into sleep, carrying the night with her like a soft, shining memory she knew she would return to again and again. She stayed seated on the small bench for a moment, not because she wanted to, but because her legs felt too weak to lift her. The last note she played was still echoing inside her mind, as if it didn't want to leave her just yet. She took a slow breath, her fingers gently resting on the keys like they weren't ready to say goodbye either. After pouring every bit of emotion she had into the performance, she didn't know what to expect from the room behind her. For a few seconds, she stayed still, trying to understand what she had done, wondering if she had gone too far by choosing the piece that meant so much to her. She had ignored the advice to keep it simple, and part of her feared she had made a mistake. She hesitated to turn around, afraid to see blank faces or polite smiles that carried no real feeling. But then she heard a sound she didn't expect. It was soft at first, faint like someone testing their courage. Then it grew louder. She opened her eyes, confused for a second, until she realized what it was. Someone in the audience had stood up and started clapping. The sound grew stronger as more people joined. She finally turned her head and saw the entire room rising to their feet, applauding with a warmth that washed over her like sunlight after a long storm. It didn't feel real. She blinked as if doing so would clear her vision and show her a more ordinary moment. But the cheering only grew louder, and more faces smiled at her with an expression she had rarely seen. Genuine appreciation. She stood slowly, her heart full and surprised at how emotional she felt. When she stepped away from the bench, her hands trembled, not from fear anymore, but from the overwhelming realization that she had reached people in a way she never thought possible. She gave a small, awkward bow, not quite sure how to respond to such a powerful reaction. She wasn't someone who usually got attention. Most of her life, she had blended quietly into the background, happy to stay unnoticed. But here she was, in the center of a room full of people clapping for her as if she had just done something extraordinary. She didn't know how to process it, but she also knew she didn't want the moment to end. When she stepped off the small stage, the event organizer approached her with wide eyes. The same person who told her earlier to keep her performance simple now looked amazed, almost speechless. After a short pause, the organizer finally spoke, admitting they had underestimated her. There was no anger in their voice, no disappointment, only admiration. They told her that her performance had touched the audience in a way that didn't happen often. She listened quietly, a modest smile forming without her trying. She didn't feel proud in a loud or boastful way. She simply felt seen. People began to gather around her, one after another, each wanting to share what they had felt during her performance. An older woman with soft eyes told her that the music reminded her of moments she thought she had forgotten. A teenager said the performance made them want to learn the piano again after quitting months ago. A man with a gentle voice mentioned that her playing made him think about someone he had lost years ago. Every person had a different story, but the common thread was clear: they felt something. Her chest tightened with emotion, but in a comforting way. She had always wondered if her music had any real value outside her small room where she practiced every night. She had questioned herself countless times. Was she wasting her time? Was she only playing for her own comfort? But now, hearing people share their experiences, she realized something important. Music created its own language, and that language had reached every corner of the room. A small child tugged at her sleeve and shyly complimented her, saying the piano sounded like magic. She couldn't help but laugh softly, touched by the simplicity of the words. She knelt slightly to meet the child's eyes and thanked them, knowing that even such small moments mattered. As she continued speaking with the people who came up to her, she noticed how different she felt. Usually, she would grow nervous when too many people surrounded her. She would feel out of place, unsure of what to say. But this time was different. She felt connected, as if her performance had created a bridge between her and everyone else. The fear she usually carried didn't show up. It didn't even whisper. It simply wasn't there. The appreciation wasn't something she chased or expected. It came naturally because she had been honest with her music. She didn't try impressing anyone with loud gestures or complicated tricks. She simply shared a piece that spoke to her heart. She understood now that people responded to truth, even in something as simple as music. After some time, the crowd began to thin as people returned to their seats or left to enjoy the rest of the event. She found a quiet corner near the hallway, trying to process everything she had experienced. Her mind kept replaying the sound of the applause, the sight of people standing, the look of warmth in their faces. She placed a hand over her chest, feeling the steady beat of her heart, which seemed calmer now but filled with a joy she had rarely felt. A friend approached her and wrapped their arms around her in a tight hug. They told her they had never seen her perform with so much courage. She smiled, admitting that she hadn't planned it that way. The decision to change the piece midway had come naturally, almost like her heart had nudged her. Her friend laughed lightly, saying that sometimes the best moments come when we stop thinking too much and simply trust what we feel. They walked together toward the exit for a bit of fresh air. Outside, the air was cool but gentle, and she inhaled deeply. She tilted her head back and looked up at the sky, feeling more grounded than she had in a long time. Her friend stood beside her, quietly giving her space to take in the moment. She wondered how her life would have been different if she had never taken the chance to perform something meaningful. She would have walked home with nothing but regret, knowing she hid her true self to play it safe. But instead, she had taken a risk. It was a small risk to others, perhaps, but to her it had felt huge. And that small moment of bravery had given her a memory she would carry forever. As she stood there, she realized something else. She didn't want this to be the end of her journey with music. She wanted to share more, perform more, learn more. Not for attention, not for applause, but because music was the part of her that felt the most honest and alive. She had spent years believing her love for the piano was a small, quiet thing. Now she understood it had a place in the world, even if that place was just one room filled with people who listened with open hearts. Her friend nudged her shoulder gently, asking what she was thinking. She smiled, a soft but confident smile, and said she felt ready for whatever came next. She wasn't sure where her path would lead, but she knew she wouldn't let fear make her hide again. As they walked back inside to gather her things, she passed by the stage one more time. The lights were dim now, and the piano sat quietly, waiting for the next performer. She ran her fingers across the side of the instrument, grateful for the moment it had given her. She whispered a small thank you, not because the piano could hear her, but because the act itself felt right. On her way out, a few people waved goodbye, their smiles still warm. She returned the gesture, her heart lighter than when she arrived earlier that day. She didn't feel like the same person who had been too afraid to take risks. She felt stronger, braver, and more open to possibilities. When she stepped outside again, the world felt a little different. Not because anything had changed, but because she had. She walked down the path with steady steps, carrying a feeling she had always secretly longed for. The belief that she was capable of touching lives, even in small ways. As she moved forward, a new thought grew inside her. Maybe this was just the beginning. Maybe there was much more waiting for her if she continued to trust herself. And with that quiet but steady hope in her heart, she headed home, already imagining the next melody she would bring to life.